tardes a todos.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for bearing with us. Thank you for your patience. You know that if something can go wrong, it goes wrong. So this time we've had some technical issues that we had not had before, and we'll be starting right now with our round table. So we welcome you to this panel that is on what strategies and protocols do we need to go out to the field with service learning projects during the pandemic. I'm Elena Massat. I'm part of CLAES. I'm normally responsible for dissemination of service learning in Peru. But this time I've been invited to moderate this session that is made up of people with a lot of experience in this pedagogy, and I'm going to introduce them. I'm going to tell you also the dynamics of this meeting. So I'm going to introduce the speakers, and then I will be asking them questions and they will be answering in order, and we will try to establish a dialogue, and then we will have some questions at the end. We'll be collecting questions from the audience at the end for the panelists. We have a panelist that is also coming a little late because she's having also some technical issues. So those issues are not only happening in Argentina. So I will start with Gustavo Gale. He's a dentist from the University of Buenos Aires. He's a specialist in orthodontics and prosthetics from that university. And he's an associate professor at the University of Buenos Aires. Since 2014, he has been a secretary of university outreach and student welfare at the university. And from that role that he's been in for many years, we have invited him to share that experience. If you don't live in Argentina, perhaps you don't know that the University of Buenos Aires has around 15 schools, 6 secondary schools, museums, cultural centers, etc. It's a huge institution. And besides, I'd like to let you know that the School of Dentistry organizes and has been organizing service learning experiences for many years now. I would say much before they even knew they were doing what we call service learning. Then we have Diana Carol Luna. She's a specialist in bromatologic control from the University of Entre Rios, also in Argentina, and she's an elementary school teacher. She has a wide training in the development of natural sciences projects in elementary school. She has been trained in service learning projects at CLAES, and she has participated in several editions of the conference, both as an attendee and as a speaker. And she's here today to answer our questions from her long experience in a project that has been carried out for 15 years now, that is called, it's a greenhouse at school number 25 Delia Meriti de Chayep in Futalaufken in the province of Chubut in Argentina. The province of Chubut is in Patagonia, and Futalaufken is on the Andes. It's a beautiful landscape. And then we have Judith Pitt. She's a professor at the University of Tangaza in Nairobi, Kenya. She has been an educator for 12 years now in higher education institutions in Eastern Africa. For 5 years, she was the regional director for Africa of Research on Educational Resources, Open Resources for Development. She has a PhD in Science and Technology from the Open University of the Netherlands, an MBA in Financial Management from the Catholic University of Eastern Africa. Currently, she's the regional coordinator of service learning in the African Hub at Tangaza University. And she's going to share her experience in this role where she supervises many experiences and her experiences during the pandemic. This is what she's going to share with us today. And we are waiting for another speaker, and I'd like to introduce her now so that when she joins us, she can already start answering the questions is Edina Malkik. Since 2008, she has been the executive director of the International Association of Open Interactive Schools in Tuzla, Bosnia-Herzegovina. From her work and throughout the community school model, where service learning is a key component, she has provided support to over 70 schools and teacher training institutes and partners in the region in their efforts to transform service learning and the students through an engaged experience and a significant experience for their development in a country that is very is in truly in need for this approach. She also facilitates the regional network of service learning of Eastern and Central Europe, and she gathers partners from all the region around service learning pedagogy and methodology. From her experience, she's going to share with us what has happened during the pandemic in the execution of service learning projects. So my first question that we want to start with is, what is the regulatory framework, the official regulatory framework, considering that here we are talking with people living in different natural, social, economic, educational landscapes that are totally different? So what's the regulatory framework, the official framework that during the pandemic that has been implemented in each of your regions? So can you start, Gustavo, please? Of course. I'm going to start. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure for me to share this conference, this panel with all of you. So here in Argentina, around March the 12th, 2020, when an executive order was issued by the president to declare the health emergency. That was a national measure. And then in the city of Buenos Aires, the local government, a week after that, they also declared the health emergency. So that was that meant the general closure of all activities in the country because they didn't know how this was going to develop. Of course, hospitals remained open. And the university also, through a resolution issued by the University of Buenos Aires, created a commission to deal with all these topics, and they decided to issue a resolution to suspend all activities, but all the activities that were not essential at the university, that is, that would accept everything that had to do with the hospitals that are managed by the university and all the assistential projects of the University of Buenos Aires. Unfortunately, all the rest was closed. And later on, some services gradually started to reopen. Of course, everything that had to do with security and maintenance were essential services, so those spaces remained open. Of course, in our secretariat, we didn't have the possibility of continuing doing what we usually do. But not long after, 2 weeks after the official measure, we reactivated everything and we went out to the streets again, not as an educational social practice, not as service learning, but as a volunteering program. We went out to look for people at the university that, to our amazement, we had many more volunteers than we had expected. We really were surprised at the response we had. Okay, so then we can continue with the other questions. Diana, would you like to continue? Hello, good afternoon. Well, I'm also from Argentina, and as Gustavo mentioned, well, yeah, that's how things happened. Suddenly, through a resolution, and then in my province, in the province of Chubut, we had both a national decree and a provincial resolution, and all schools were immediately closed, and all the non-essential activities were closed. And for schools like ours that has the greenhouses, this was a serious complication. I'm going to explain later on what happened. But that measure was imparted by the Ministry of Education together with the Ministry of Health. So that was the order. We had to close all schools, and absolutely nobody was allowed to go out. We need special permits to reach the school. My school is 45 kilometers from my city, the city of Esquel. So it was very difficult for us to get to school. We needed some police permits, etc. Then this was relaxed, but initially, well, we had a lot of uncertainty, and because nobody knew what was really happening, so the measures were very, very strict. So gradually, we started doing things, but it was not easy because we were not authorized from the ministry. So I was the only one that was authorized to get to the school, but the truth is that the greenhouse need a lot of hands for their maintenance. Anyway, some of us went to school even though it was not authorized, and we had to ask for some special permits for us to circulate because it was not allowed to move around in our province. Thank you, Diana. Judith?
Good evening, and thank you very much for the opportunity to share in the 24th CLESS conference. It is really my pleasure to share here about our experiences right here in Kenya. Indeed, just as my colleagues have mentioned, there were a number of measures that were put in place in terms of regulations during the pandemic period. Way back in March 2020, indeed, there were a number of changes, and we experienced panic and fear because no one knew what was going on and no one knew when this would end. And therefore, this pushed the government together with various ministries to put measures in place that would help in prevention rather than waiting to treat the pandemic or to treat the virus. So one of the most tangible regulations that first came was about the Ministry of Education and the Ministry of Health, whereby first and foremost, the institutions were shut down to prevent, the crowding areas that could be one of the key points in which the virus could spread very fast. Then the Ministry of Health put measures they set up a toll call center for information that would spread news about COVID-19 and how it would really affect us if we do not wash hands, if we do not sanitize, if we do not keep social distancing. So these were quite interesting and quite important measures that were put in good time. And then ban of gatherings. So the most challenging is that most of our people in the country are, like going to church. They like worshiping. They like going to mosques and sanctuaries where they seek their God. Now, if this was banned, then people really felt affected. And those are some of the measures and regulations that the government put in place. Curfew was put from 6 p.m. to 5 a.m., which was quite also a big shock to many of us who had never experienced being home from 6 p.m. and then only leaving the house at 5 a.m. So lockdown and curfew also affected us in several ways, as we shall see in the next questions. And then now, later on, people started getting used to this and things getting opened up slowly by slowly and bit by bit. But eventually now, I think we are getting used to the system and the normal way, a new way of living. And I think I'll stop there for the regulations.
Gracias, Judith. Bueno, seguimos con Diana, que hace tantos años que tiene esta experiencia seguida cuerpo a cuerpo, que es la de niños, vivero Niños del Lago. ¿Cómo incidió este marco regulatorio? Vos decís que te dieron autorización solo a vos, que necesitabas más manos, en la práctica de estas experiencias. Vas a tener que contarles muy brevemente de qué se trata la experiencia.
Sí. Bueno, el vivero Niños del Lago es un vivero escolar que surge hace 15 años a raíz de un incendio forestal. Nuestra escuela está dentro de un parque nacional, rodeada de bosque, y a partir de ahí, bueno, surge desde unos papás y un guardaparque el poder
came up with the idea of starting planting native trees. We come from a multi-level school. We have children who are 3 years old, and we also have primary and secondary education, but it is a rural school. We have 56 students right now. It is oriented to tourism programs, and all the students, from the younger ones to the elder ones, and they participate. They have to separate the seeds, they have to plant them. And the project was born out of this phenomenon. We had a lot of fires, wildfires, so the seeds have to be produced in order to take them to the burnt down forest. So for 15 years, we have been producing seeds. We started with 300 plants per year. Now we have 5,000. More than 25,000 plants that have been planted in different burnt forests. The one in Cholila has also been affected by a serious wildfire. So we want native species to be everywhere. And of course, they bring in the energy of children because they were the ones that started with those seeds. It has to do with nature, the greenhouse. We also have a green garden, and inside a greenhouse we have also meals at the school. So those gardens require a lot of water and care. And in our school we have a special school year. We usually start lessons in January. So until the pandemic broke out, we were already working at school. We were collecting and planting the seeds, and all of a sudden we had to stop doing that. So it was important for us to make some adjustments, to take the greenhouses to places where they have part of the shade, because they have to be protected from sunlight and also from the winds. With the winds in the area, you also have damage caused to the greenhouses. So we have to be there present. That was the greatest obstacle because we couldn't be physically present there. Of course, children were not there, but the professor in charge of this project was there along with some other colleagues from other courses, other grades. So they collaborated all the time. We also have some parents that helped, as well as some crew members who work in the forest, firefighters that usually work in the park. So all this group of adults were able to help us throughout the year. But did you implement any special protocol? I'm sorry? Did you use any special protocol? Yes, of course. We would have to abide by the protocol. We have to keep social distancing. We have to wear face masks. Since these activities take place outdoors, that was an advantage, but we had to be there in small groups. Only a few people could be there at the same time. And since we started before, the plantlets of the green garden were already growing by that time. So the professor had to record videos so that everybody know what to do. So the children had to pick up their own plantlets in order to take them home and continue with the growth process there. Only the adults could go to the school. So we have to strictly follow that protocol. Although at that time in Chubut and in our location in Esquel, we didn't have any COVID-19 cases, but anyway, we have to follow the rules. Thank you, Diana. Judith? Is there She's going to ask the question.
Okay.
Is there any aspect about experiences that you oversee that you would like to highlight here?
Yes, indeed. To speak the truth, the pandemic has wreaked unprecedented havoc on children and on families and on communities. And this I'm relating to actions that relate to service learning. Taking, for instance, one of the protocols of school closure, we realized that most of the girls, because now they were home, they spent more time with boys and men than while they were in school. And this basically led to greater a likelihood of them getting engaged in risky sexual behaviors, sexual violence and exploitation, which ideally affected the government's plan of 100% transition from high school to the universities. So this, for me, was kind of an experience that we need to echo and see, and then counter on the best ways in which we could also take these girls back to school. So closure of schools and learning institutions has a great impact on our learners, and not only the learners, even to the lecturers who were used to the face-to-face way, more mode of teaching and learning, to the learning management systems that were now offered online and through a digital platform. So that really, for me, is an experience that we need to echo and see how we can counter the impact of COVID-19 in our midst.
Okay, okay. Gustavo?
Great, thank you. Gustavo? As I was telling you, once the pandemic was declared, we couldn't just sit idle. We have the largest university in the country with almost 300,000 students, considering the entire university community. We are close to 400,000 people. So all of us working here in the Secretariat and different schools got together along with the members of a program that is called the Integral Community Action Program for Vulnerable Towns. Today it is called UBA in Action. Joined forces, and we put ourselves at the service of the national government and the city government in order to see how we could help. We started with different activities. Of course, the pandemic was in its first few days. There was no vaccine. Initially, we didn't know much about the virus. It was a cold season, so we started with a flu vaccine campaign. Then we were part of the Detectar program, that is a testing program. Of course, the School of Medicine, the School of Dentistry, the School of Pharmacy and Biochemistry had students that were capable of joining in those activities. Others would do administrative work, helping from a different perspective. And now, let me share with you a short video that illustrates in a couple of minutes what happened over these recent months. Our university celebrated its 200th anniversary quite recently, so we also gave some awards to some people in recognition for their efforts during the pandemic. If you allow me, I will share my screen and I will play the video. Elena, you can tell me whether we can hear the audio, okay? Yes, great. Argentine Pride. I wanted to thank you all who have been here from the very beginning of the pandemic with us, supporting the program UBA in Action. I'm very proud of being part of the University of Buenos Aires. And we know that here we are educated, we can be teachers, we can be better professionals. I am very happy with the volunteering work they are doing. Being part of this university means that we are educating students, and we have the help of former students. I want to thank all the students from the University of Buenos Aires. We have been in this volunteering program for 1 year, providing meals to homeless people. Today, we are observing a lot of economic hardship, so our schools and the university hospital are providing services in the middle of this pandemic. In these kind of circumstances where people feel so much sorrow and pain, when we see young people doing this, we realize that not everything is lost, that we can continue fighting. Everybody's waiting for the students in this neighborhood. Here, there are a lot of people in need. We are very proud of being able to give something back to society. We are starting with this dentistry service here in the square. We are now in the parking lot of the School of Law, and there is a blood donation campaign here. Blood donation saves lives. I want to recognize those who were here in difficult times in the streets, in the neighborhoods. I have nothing but words of appreciation to you. And I think that this diploma reflects the social engagement of UBA students. We want to acknowledge your efforts and thank you for your efforts during the pandemic. Thank you deeply from our hearts. I'm sure you will be the future of the Argentine people. I'm extremely thankful, proud, and moved. Long life to UBA.
Bueno, nada, uno desde acá mira.
When you watch the video, it is really moving. So this is just an illustration of what we have done. Let me say something. When I got my first vaccine, I got it at the School of Medicine. The student in charge of the administrative work said, "We study for free. Nowhere else in the world can you study for free. This is the right place to give something back to society." I wanted to hug him and kiss him, because that was a great comment for me. And what about parents? Did you encounter any resistance with parents or with students? Yes, of course. There were some students that have their own opinion, their own position. In the university, together with the general secretariat team, the lawyers, we had to have a waiver for students. They had to volunteer it was a voluntary commitment. Nobody knew what was going to happen. So it was an individual decision actually to go out and help. We also need to bear in mind that most of the people who participated at the beginning came from the School of Medicine and the School of Dentistry. And of course, in those programs, we are, to a certain extent, more trained to deal with this kind of health-related circumstances, more than students in other programs. Of course, we need to take some precautionary measures, but we worked in a different way. In my profession, I could see that professionals in the past would work without gloves, and now they all work with gloves. So I think that we learned a lot also along the process. So of course, there were some students that perhaps got together, the three of them would start living in the same apartment instead of going back to their family homes in order to avoid infecting their own relatives or the elderly in the family. Judith, in that regard, along these lines, you were talking about the experiences and the situations that have been triggered by the pandemic. So, with your prior service learning background and experience, what differences could you identify in terms of planning of projects before the pandemic and then during the pandemic?
Well, very good one indeed, because before the pandemic, we were able to do things on face-to-face basis, which makes it easier for people to understand, internalize, and implement. Later on, during the pandemic, this was thwarted. So we went on using digital platforms to communicate. We were using the learning management systems to reach our students and the community so that we could be able to offer our services to them that would also help them to understand the impact of the pandemic in our midst. Then now, when we talk about reaching out to those whom we were serving, we mostly used telephone calls. We used digital money transfers. And you know, the Ministry of Health also had the mHealth, whereby people could only consult doctors and those who are within the medical fraternity using the telephone, where they could send text messages and also could ask for the doctors to describe medication to them. So this ideally changed our usual way of doing things, that of engaging, where people could even go to hospitals and seek medication, but then you are advised, not unless it is really a serious case, please let us go do this using telephones. Then the other thing I would want to echo is that with the pandemic, many things changed. The barriers in this country, especially from where I come from, is such of one of the most treasured rights of passage in our own communities. But as a result of the pandemic, things changed. Our normal way of burying the dead changed. And the ministry took over on how the victims of the pandemic were being buried. And this, we felt sometimes it was not really in a better, respectful way, the manner in which we used to do our things. So this really affected people's, the way of thinking, and we would got more threatened and fearful and panicking all over.
Judith, why don't you tell us a little bit about this? Because this is completely new for us and we don't know exactly what you are referring to. Tell us the before and after.
Now, before, for instance, if I take on the burial rights, when somebody is dead in my community, this is in the Western Kenya, then the community comes up with a strategy in which the body of the dead is taken to the mortuary for a number of weeks as the plans are on. During this period, people are gathering in their homes to console the family, to show solidarity and love, and all this related to the fact that we care for one another when you are alive and when you are dead. And then when now the burial ceremony comes in on the day of the burial, then a community, people will gather in huge numbers coming to celebrate the last day of the passing of the dead. Now, during this period also, people eat, celebrate in different ways, dancing, songs, good food, and people are together and uniting, sharing of ideas on how they want to support the widow and the orphans. And this was quite treasured in my own community. Now, after and during the pandemic, this was thwarted. Things had to be done differently. The body must be buried within 72 hours, which was quite a shock. And the manner in which it is done, the family members and the normal rites are not undertaken. The Ministry of Health takes over, buries the person on their own, and the family members are kept off completely the process of the burying. And this is really a challenge in our societies, and acceptance is still a process in which people will still come to into terms with the manner in which the dead were buried during the pandemic.
Claro. Y eso, por ejemplo, ustedes no hubo alguna.
Was there any response? In many places, we saw a lot of support to burials and to mourning families. Several universities, for instance, with the schools of psychology or mental health, provided support to relatives who had lost a beloved one. So that was part of their practices. Did you have something like that?
Yes, specifically in my university, Tangaza University College, the psychology, the counseling psychology department and the university counselors were joining up with such families, and especially they are focusing on children and the adolescents, because they were really affected. And the widows, indeed, the women suffered more as compared to men in such kind of scenario, because the aspect of the mental torture, burying your dear one in a manner in which no one understands and seeing things that you did not expect to see, was quite a mental problem. And this, to some cases, led to mental health issues in so many families as at now as we speak. But my university, with a department on counseling psychology and very experienced and professional counselors, went onto the ground and has been doing this using telephone calls during those times when people could not move. And now they're still making follow-up to ensure that a sustainable solution to such kind of affected homes are actually found. And then others also learn from such kind of experiences to ensure that that is not repeated and life continues.
Gracias, Judith.
Thank you, Judith, so much. A question for Gustavo. Do you know if the School of Psychology at the University of Buenos Aires did something about that? Yes, they participated, of course. Yes, they did participate. They provided, of course, psychological support to whoever needed, of course. And what tools did they use? Because the question is, what are the new tools that you had to use? I mean, to face these restrictions that we had, because probably this assistance to those that are in grief was something that already existed before COVID, and now they had to adopt a different approach. And to all of you, actually, the question is, what are the tools, the new tools that had to be used during the pandemic? Well, one thing is the academic aspect, and then on the other hand, we have this volunteer and service learning projects. As to the academic part itself, well, as we all know, well, we had to use different virtual platforms to teach the lessons, but some courses were more limited because in my case, in dentistry, I'm a teacher here, we have a lot of practice in our lessons. The students have to do practical things, you know, as future dentists, and they couldn't do that. So they lost a year basically in their education. As from October, they were invited to come to the school to do some practices. And in February this year, 2021, those practices became mandatory. Last year, they were voluntary, at least in the School of Dentistry. Of course, with all the precautions and the care. Theory is still virtual. I mean, we are in this hybrid methodology now for education, yeah, virtual and face-to-face. But well, that's how things are now. And then as teachers, what I saw is that the virtual methodology forced us to prepare things differently, perhaps to record lessons, to share quizzes. I mean, things that we used to do in face-to-face were now done remotely. And then as to our volunteering programs, well, that was basically, you know, contacting people face-to-face with all the protocols and all the precautions. As we know, that was the only way. And this is what we are still doing. Another question that is out of the script, let's say. It's not something that we had planned. You can choose not to answer. You're used to working with students. And in this situation, what about teachers? How did they act? How did they react? Well, this is the same as anywhere else. Some reacted well, others not so well. Initially, when we didn't know much about the situation, the Some wanted to go back to school, others thought that was a crazy idea, but then they started seeing that, well, gradually we were able to go back to school. Speaking of my school of dentistry, we are all healthcare professionals, essential. We are all essential personnel. We are considered essential. So we were allowed to go to work and deal with emergencies in our office, etc. Initially more limited, but then it was more relaxed. But also with the administrative staff at the school, it was the same. Some were willing to come back, others were not. That was very personal. There was, I mean, it was not mandatory for them to come. Now, yes, as you know, the government in Argentina has just issued, in mid-August, issued an executive order that face obligations, return for all those that had at least one dose of the vaccine. So there you are forcing everybody to go back to the old normal. Diana, now that the situation is more controlled, etc., what about your school? Are the students going to school? Are they going back to the project? Yes. As soon as we were able to go back to school, some time ago, first we went back in small groups, or bubbles, as we call them. The school is small, and as we have a dining area, when we are eating, we are not wearing our masks, so it's a critical moment. And we now have the tables in the gallery to have more open air. So gradually, we have been returning to school, but in small groups. I was listening to Gustavo, and it's true what he says. The digital platforms and all the information. Well, we have a program, Chubut Educates, but we do not have internet here. So what about that? So we had to record videos that then we went from house to house distributing the videos. As we couldn't have a personal contact, we left the copies at the entrance of the house, perhaps next to the trees in the front garden. So we had also a special box in the school to exchange some materials. The teachers would use that to distribute the materials. That was our platform, let's say, from house to house. So we learned a lot because our activity is mainly done face to face, planting, going out to the forest. You cannot do that digitally. And the teacher and all the teachers in their own areas started preparing videos. It was very difficult for us at the beginning. Well, perhaps the young teachers didn't have so much difficulties, but it was very hard for me. And we learned a lot. That was great also. But we still prefer the traditional way. Do you think that any of the tools or the learnings that you gained throughout this stage will continue after the pandemic? Perhaps you have discovered something that has a huge potential, even when we go back to normal. Yes, I think that this is going to be added to what we were already doing. Because, of course, being able to connect with others and the students connecting among them. This is a rural area, and many of the children were almost on their own with their parents and perhaps a sibling only. And their meeting place is a school, their place for socializing. So the video calls, the mobile phones, allow them to be connected. Perhaps they didn't do that in the past. Perhaps there was only one mobile phone for all the family. But now they use their mobile phone to be educated, and they learn to use other tools that are very useful for many things. They learn also to create videos, to upload them, or to write a text, or show their homework through photographs. things that we were not used to doing before. And I think that, of course, that is here to stay, as everybody says. I'm sure that it's going to supplement what we are doing. So we learned a lot. These videos that you upload to Facebook, perhaps, well, the students will be able to do them on their own. Of course, absolutely. Videos, the PowerPoints, editing the videos, and they learned a lot because they also had to record the audios and edit them. So now they know how much they can do and how they can reach the others. And that also has an educational value because they said, how have we been assessed? Well, you couldn't write it, but you were able to tell it, you were able to sing it. So they created the stories, the legends. It was wonderful, actually. Thank you, Diana. Judith, what about you as to the new tools that you had to start using because of this situation? What can you tell us about that?
Well, then,
yeah, what was the most amazing thing?
Yes, the most amazing thing is that my situation is somehow related to the one for Diane in the a situation whereby some students were not able to have some digital gadgets that could enhance the digital learning and teaching. So our university ensured that those such students through the Dean of Students office were given laptops and Android phones that could enhance them to access the learning during that particular time. And we also went online, the emergency remote teaching that was really mandatory to everyone. So whether you had the prior knowledge of using and reusing these platforms that enhances learning digitally, then that was not really a question or something to talk about. We also had ensured that because of the nature of our students, there are those who are really coming from low background. So we also had to ensure that they have internet connectivity that would enhance them to do access this learning. So I remember our university was also supplying bundles that would enhance students to access learning through those the digital gadgets that were given to them. So these are new tools that you are using, reaching out to our students via email, via SMSs, via social media to ensure that they are fine and ensuring them, solidarity, showing solidarity with them and encouraging them, counseling some of them that thought they'll never come back to the university. And one interesting experience is that there are those who are working very hard from the village setup, rural areas. And their main reason why they work hard to pass exam at a secondary level is for them to come to the university, not to wait to be taught while they are at home in the kitchen using the mobile phones, the laptops. So it was really a challenge to them. But with the new platform, with the new tools that we engaged, now we have come into terms that we cannot do away with these digital learning materials. The learning management systems that are already been put in place, the infrastructures which have been built, we cannot get rid of them. We are now embracing a blended mode of learning and teaching, which is actually one of the best for some of us who have seen the needful of this. Now we are realizing how much we can do with these digital gadgets that we have, how much we can also learn by embedding the use of open educational resources vis-a-vis the ICT integration in teaching and learning. So this was very helpful.
Judith, una pregunta fuerte.
Judith, I have another question that is not in the script. What about those laptops that you said that you distributed? You said it was an opportunity for the students. Who distributed that? Who funded that? The university or the government?
This was squarely done by our university. because we also have students who are in need. And when this was raised by most of them that they do not have this gadget, then the university had to come in good time to support them so that our learning could continue. We could not have a stop at because of the pandemic. So the university squarely funded these laptops to the students who are really in need.
Can I ask you very briefly to make a description of the characteristics of your university for all of us on the other side of the world too, because we ignore many things about your country. So what are the characteristics of your university? It's a private, public university. Is it religious or not? Where it's located? What kind of population has access to it? Very briefly.
The Tangaza University College is located in Nairobi, Kenya. It's a private university under the Catholic, run by the Catholics. And this was brought together by 28 religious congregations. So the nature of our students is a mixed up, and our students come from almost 40 countries. It's a Pan-African university. And most of them are religious who are being trained to become priests, religious brothers, nuns. But then we also have a mixture of lay students who come from other parts, everywhere in the country and otherwise, but they are not being trained or formed to become, religious in the sense that Catholic nuns or priests or brothers. So that is the nature of our institution. And we offer courses not only related to religious courses, but also to the secular world. So it is a blend of all, which is very helpful in terms of intercultural learning and sustainability.
Okay, muchas gracias, Judith. Les pregunto a todos.
Thank you, Judith. This is a question for all of you. At a personal level, what do you think that you learned from this experience? I'm not talking about the human aspect of things, but in your role, in your institution, what changed in your mind? Gustavo, you go first, please. I was thinking the answer that I could give you, but what changed in my mind? Well, the truth is that from my role and from my profession, it's always a matter of being at the service of others. And this was exacerbated by the situation. But I'm always thinking about how to go back to my normal life. The projects that we had planned in the secretariat, we have a lot of university extension projects, and we go all over the country. Why don't you tell the other panelists and the audience what the School of Dentistry has historically done? Well, historically, there is already a program in place that has existed for more than 30 years. Dentistry students go with 3 trailer trucks with all the odontological equipment, and they cover the entire country from the south to the north. We establish agreements with foundations, with schools, with governments within the provinces, and we provide dentistry services. Basically, that is what we do from the School of Dentistry. From the Secretariat, we promote this program, but for all schools in the university. We have a project that is subsidized by us to do extension activities. Of course, there is a competition process, there are evaluations, and the best proposals are the ones that have access to these subsidies. And they can have higher subsidies if they also include a community practice or a service learning oriented practice. That is what we promote here. And can you pinpoint learning opportunities in students and or teachers as a result of your experience in the last year and a half? Well, let me think. Well, yes, of course. Yes. For instance, well, some people who were dentists but, or students or teachers, and they had never applied a vaccine, and now they had to apply vaccines to the population. For instance, in those in medical practices were already used to doing this, but anyway, there was a coordinator that perhaps was already a professional, and the students that were doing their practices, and the community that receives the vaccine. That is a specific example. Then there are many other aspects that had to do with the students' will and volunteering work. We distributed hot meals to the homeless. We did that from the very beginning of the pandemic until today to those who live in the streets in the city of Buenos Aires. So the food is cooked in a space in the School of Nutrition within the School of Medicine. This activity is coordinated by teachers, and we distribute the meals they prepare in that program to the homeless people. That is something that I can think of now. And also in the School of Psychology, we had also telephone calls during the pandemic for whoever needed some support. So there were some advanced students that would run these practices coordinated by teachers. And what about teachers? Did you identify anything in the teachers, among the teachers? Because it is always more difficult to do something. What do you mean? Whether they participate in? No, I'm asking that usually they are harder. I mean, like stones, because of the age, it is easier to open the minds of young people than those that are older. Well, with all the people that I work with, everybody was extremely open-minded and open to this new virtual reality. Of course, some found it more difficult than others to get used to using platforms, recording their lessons, and participating in online meetings. Others found it much more easy, but that is the truth. Of course, that affects older people than younger people who were born in a different era, in the digital era. In the first panel of the conference, I don't know if you watched it, but on the first day, there was a presentation by Juan Esteban Alberrain, and he talked about the resistance to change in institutions, that institutions are quite reluctant to change. So I was thinking along those lines. Sometimes you are faced with a very novel situation, an unprecedented situation like this, and it is very difficult. You lock down. Perhaps young people can adjust faster, right? Diana, what about you? What did you learn? You and your students. Well, in this new dynamics, when we went back, when we were so worried about social distancing, students found it much easier to adapt. They follow all the instructions. They are capable of adjusting quite quickly. And the role of the teachers is usually to ask for things right away. But teachers realized that we had to slow down, to pause for a minute and see if it is really that urgent. Sometimes we need to take more time, we need to get organized in order to avoid hurrying unnecessarily. So in my particular case and in my institution, this set a different timing, a different pace for our institution. Now we identify priorities. Of course, there are always urgent requests or needs. And I don't know what is the institution or the body that oversees your school. We do have supervisors, yes. Did you have any pressure from them? Well, actually, the supervisor also has to follow certain rules. And what was most difficult for us was to not being able to travel to the school, because teachers were doing that voluntarily. And sometimes because of insurance related issues or because of the rules, they were not allowed to travel. Some teachers had to take care of the greenhouse and the green gardens, but that was the most difficult part. Oftentimes, we had conversations that were not so pleasant, and to a certain extent, as we didn't know the scale of this pandemic, we also had the risk. We didn't know what would happen if we would travel to the school. It is true that now in Berghain, retrospectively, we realized that there wasn't that level of risk as we thought it was. Well, nobody knew, actually. But the ministry had a very strong position. They shut down the schools, and they didn't care what was happening with those schools that raised cattle or produced crops or plants. That was a serious difficulty. Judith, what about you, your university, your team? What would you say that were the new learning opportunities that you found in this year and a half for students and teachers? Those things that you can say, well, we can capitalize on this, we can take advantage of this. It was a result of a dramatic situation, but it can be useful for the future. Perhaps we can give a new meaning to that.
Very well put, Elena. Now, I would specifically start by saying that we have all appreciated the fact that change is inevitable. And at a particular point, you realize that there is that aspect of resistance to change. And this we also experienced among my colleagues who are the faculty members, parents, and of course, the students. Some of them refused to take online examination, and they had to wait until the similar courses are on offer when school now opened. And so now they're coming to do the physical examination, which is now we offer it in bits, not in full blown. And now the learnings that I would really want to echo here is that we had to build new and stable digital infrastructures that would therefore enhance the learning management systems, which has now become part and parcel of our education system in our university. And this is a plus, and I'm very impressed and happy with my university for the fact that this particular change took place very fast, gradually, but we were very sure what we were doing. And now we are very happy to have this in place, and it's very, very helpful now and even in the near future. Two, there's also the power of in physical connection. I realized that, okay, face-to-face is very good. It is where what we have been using before, Our students got used to it to a level whereby they became resistant to change to this. However, we have also learned that we can do so much while even at home. So this is also a new learning that we are realizing that even though I've always been traveling and going to work every morning, going for meetings, rushing in the traffic jam, sometimes wasting hours on the road, but then we can do more while I am working from home. These are new learnings, and people are now trying to catch up and appreciate the fact that new changes happened. Now, there's also the beauty of integrating ICT and open educational resources in our teaching and learning, because through this, we are building the culture of reading in our students, and also motivating our lecturers to publish more so that others also can read from us. We not only therefore become consumers of information, but we also contribute to the information. So when we integrate ICT and OER in our teaching and learning, then we are also building a stronger future in terms of, embracing digital learning methodologies. Now, we had also been believing so much on physical structures, building huge structures, that of late now with the pandemic, we have learned something. We don't need to have a huge building. We just need a small space where we can operate from, but then many things can be done off the structures. So these are new learnings that ideally we have to embrace, that is going to help us now and in the future. And the strength of social capital also, we should not ignore this. It is quite interesting and is quite also engaging to ensure that we have those in place to help us proceed and also understand the true meaning of education in our society.
Bueno, una pregunta.
I have one question for you. Would you like to ask questions to one another? Perhaps I can stop for a minute and I can leave you the floor to ask questions to one another. Anything that you would like to ask on behalf of one university to the representative of the other university, perhaps Gustavo with a university that is so different, the one represented by Judith here.
Can I start by asking something? I'm asking Diane.
Claro, claro. A Diana, sí, por supuesto, quien quieras.
To Diana? Yes, of course.
Yes, now, yeah, she mentioned about the rural setup of her university. And with my experience as well in terms of those in the rural and those in the urban setup in terms of comparison, I'm just wondering whether they also have power, power blackouts or lack of power, and how this is really working out with the fact that now we are using digital platforms to teach and learn.
Sí. Nosotros tenemos electricidad.
We have electricity where we are located. We have power. It is true that sometimes we have snowstorms and trees fall, and we may have a transient blackout. The problem is that we don't have an internet connection. We do not have bandwidth. Everything is quite precarious in that regard. So the school, if you have two people connected online, then nobody else can use the internet. So what happened during this period was that with the devices and with the internet and their mobile phones, everybody had to do everything through that means. We do have electricity, but we don't have internet connection. And we also have a precarious heating infrastructure.
Thank you very much.
Do you?
Yes.
So my question to you is the same. What is it like in your university?
Yes, in our university and in the universities that are based in the rural areas, now during this period of time, people, boats and others were able to be given power backups where they could move into a center where electricity is during the day, they charge the power backups, they charge their phones, then they can use them at home. And then, I mean, also put bundles for internet connectivity. So we have a lot of similarity, university and our own here. It is very interesting.
Sí.
Yes,
Sí, sí.
that's true.
Quería hacer
Nos
una
quedan 10
aclaración.
minutos para preguntas del público y preguntas que ustedes pueden hacerse y yo descanso y los miro.
I will take a break now and I will watch you have a discussion. Perhaps we can also have questions from the audience. Let me make a point of clarification. Perhaps here we have a better internet connection than in the south of our country, in Chubut, where Diana is. We do have more access, but there is also an economic factor here that we need to take into account. Some students in the university cannot pay for an internet connection. And last year, in Congress, a bill was introduced to make sure that students and people of a certain condition could have access free of charge to internet. Because as you said, although we can transfer a large part of our teaching activities and learning activities online, if you don't have access, then you will be left out. That is a limiting factor. One of the questions that we ask ourselves was, is this here to stay? And yes, to a certain extent, it is here to stay, but we also have these limiting conditions. We don't have full access for all the people. That's true. That's true. It is an excellent tool, but and you have these trailer trucks that you use for dentistry services. Were they on the road over the last few months? Yes, not across the entire country, but they operated within the city of Buenos Aires. In fact, these trucks are driving every day. Sometimes they are next to or in front of the Congress building, and they provide services to people from the community. And we also go to vulnerable areas and towns to provide these services. That is extremely important. All right. Let me make a comment. Another positive aspect from the pandemic in terms of access and the online presence had to do with the fact that secondary school students have to work a lot online with their teachers. So that allowed them to learn other ways of studying, because not everyone can go somewhere else to study. Here we do have a university, the National University of Patagonia, that does not include all the programs. So many students traveled to other provinces, to Cordoba and Buenos Aires, to other universities. But here they realized that there are ways to go into college programs, university programs, at least virtually at the beginning. So that they were forced to get used to that. So those that started college this year were already used to that. That was a positive aspect for us and our school. That was not common. We did not consider that. So here there is a person who is asking a question. The question is, if you had to provide a specific strategy, which one would that be from your own position, from your own setting? Because once or after these 18 months of a pandemic, would you do anything differently? Would you approach community engagement and community actions differently? Would you make any corrections, adjustments? Okay, let me go first. In our case, we had meetings and we have been talking and providing training about ICTs, the need to include them. But once again, at our school, there are not enough devices, there is no internet connection. That was always an excuse, but now teachers are also including that in their plans, in their lesson plans, because we had to learn a lot, but we succeeded in introducing that part of the technology in our classes. And also, we have students that for different reasons today cannot attend classes in person. So with this practice, these students can participate anyway in our lessons. So it is true that it demands much more work because teachers had to be teaching in parallel, in person and online, but now we have the opportunity to introduce this and to have a combination of both. So it is good to introduce also the ICTs in our plans. What about the rest? Judith, Gustavo? Let me answer that question. When the pandemic started, although there was some level of transition towards digital platforms, we were forced to do that overnight. So now that is already in place. And this is so much so that I think that many theoretical courses that used to be delivered in person now will be delivered online from now onwards. I think that will be like that. At the same time, the educational service related practices, well, I think that teachers, students, and the community have to be present. So I think that the online component is much more difficult. I would like the face-to-face gatherings more. Yes, I understand, but what about prevention, instructions? Yes, of course. Of course. With this situation, we raised a lot of awareness about all the precautionary measures in the circumstances. Of course, that can stay, but if we need to do field work, well, we need to be in person. Judith, to conclude, what would you say?
Yes, I would say that in the 21st century education system, I think it is mandatory that we need to integrate ICT and OER in our teaching and learning, and therefore all higher learning institutions and in schools, we therefore need to encourage and build sustainable digital infrastructures that will enhance online education. Because now we are not very certain on when this pandemic will end. We have to live with it. And through that process, we also have to adjust our systems, adjust our policies to ensure that we are within the times of change. And therefore, I really encourage that we have sustainable infrastructures that would enhance blended learning. I love face-to-face because I connect one-on-one with my students, but now things have changed. I must therefore also change with the changes of the time so that I can be relevant.
Bien.
Yes, that's so true. Thank you so much to the three of you. I regret that the fourth speaker, Edina, was not able to join us because this was a very rich discussion, but I'm sure she will be with us next time. Obviously, technology is not easy anywhere. So thank you so much. Thank you for participating in this roundtable. So now I invite you to connect on the YouTube channel for the closing session starting at 4:15 p.m. Argentina time. Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Chao.